Chapter 16, The Tiger Rising. Rob sat out on the curb in front of the motel room and waited for Sistine to come back using the phone. She had her green dress wrapped up in a grocery bag. He had tried to fold the dress up neatly, but folding a dress turned out to be an impossible task, and he finally gave up. Now he held the bag out away from him so that the grease from the medicine on his legs would not stain it. He was relieved when Sistine finally walked toward him out of the darkness. "Hey," he said. "Hi." She sat down on the steps next to him. "How come you don't have a phone?" He shrugged. "Ain't got nobody to call, I guess." "My mother's coming to get me," Sistine said. Rob nodded. "Here's your dress." He handed her the bag. Sistine took it and then tilted her head to look up at the sky. Rob looked up too. The clouds had shifted, and there were clear patches where the stars shone through. "I can see the Big Dipper," Sistine said. "I like looking up at things. And so do my mom and dad." That's how they met. They were both looking up at the ceiling at the Sistine Chapel, and they weren't watching where they were going, and they bumped into each other. "That's why my name is Sistine." "I like your name," said Rob shyly. "I've seen the Sistine ceiling too," she said. "They took me last year, before Bridget, when they were still in love." "Does it look like the pictures?" Rob asked. "Better," said Sistine. I don't know. It's like looking at fireworks, kind of." "Oh," said Rob. "Maybe we can go to Italy sometime, and I could show you." "That would be all right," said Rob. He smiled into the darkness. "That tiger don't look up at the stars," said Sistine, her voice getting hard. "He's got that piece of wood over his head, and he can't look up at all. We've got to let him go." Rob was silent. He was hoping that if he didn't answer her, he might go back to talking about the Sistine ceiling. "How did your mother die?" she asked suddenly. Rob sighed. He knew there was no point in trying not to answer. "Cancer," he said. "What was her name?" "I ain't supposed to talk about her," said Rob, closing his eyes to the stars and concentrating instead on his suitcase, working to keep it closed. "Why not?" said Sistine. "Because my dad says it don't do no good to talk about it. He said she's gone and she ain't coming back. That's why we moved here to Jacksonville, because everybody always wanted to talk about her. We moved down here to get on with things." There was a crunch of gravel, and Rob opened his eyes in time to see headlights of a car sweep over them. "That's my mother," said Sistine. She stood up. "Quick," she said. "Tell me your mother's name." Rob shook his head. "Say it," she demanded. "Caroline," Rob said softly, cracking his suitcase open and letting the word slip out. Sistine gave him another businesslike nod of her head. "Okay," she said. "I'll come back tomorrow, and we'll make our plans of letting the tiger go." "Sissy," called a voice. "Baby, what in the world are you doing out here?" Sistine's mother got out of the car and came walking toward them. She had on high heels, and she wobbled as she walked in the gravel parking lot of the Kentucky Star. Her hair was a lighter shade of yellow than Sistine's and piled up high. When she turned her head, Rob recognized Sistine's profile, with the sharp chin and the pointed nose, but the mouth was different, tighter. "Good Lord," said Mrs. Bailey to Sistine. "What have you got on?" "Clothes," said Sistine. "Sissy, you look like a hobo. Get in the car." She tapped her high-heel foot on the gravel. Sistine didn't move. She stood beside Rob. "Well," said her mother, when Sistine didn't move, "you must be Rob." "What's your last name, Rob?" "Horton," said Rob. "Horton," said Mrs. Bailey. "Horton? Are you related to Sheldon Horton, the congressman?" "No, ma'am," said Rob. "I don't think so." Mrs. Bailey's eyes flickered away from him and back to Sistine. "Baby," said Mrs. Bailey, "please get in the car." When Sistine didn't move, Mrs. Bailey sighed and looked back at Rob again. "She won't listen to a word I say," Mrs. Bailey told him. "Her father's the only one she'd listen to." And then under her breath she muttered, "Her father, the liar." Sistine growled somewhere deep in her throat and stalked to the car, got in and slammed the door. "You're the liar," she shouted from the back seat of the car. "You're the one who lies." "Jesus," said Mrs. Bailey. She shook her head and turned, walked back to the car without saying anything else to Rob. Rob watched them pull away. He could see Sistine sitting in the back seat. His shoulders were slumped. The motel room door slammed. Somebody laughed. A dog barked once, short and high. and then stopped, and then there was silence. Caroline, Rob whispered into the darkness. Caroline, Caroline, Caroline. The word was as sweet as a forbidden candy on his tongue.